Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and it's time for part 2 of my 2019 garden plan brought to you by Vessi Seeds. Part 1 of this, I reviewed last year's garden, where I'd placed everything, successes and failures, new ideas, insights, and so on and so forth, and just try to put that all in context to give you a sense of how I go about planning the next year's garden, right? It's all based on what I did the year before and, of course, what I'd like to do this time. So that was the previous garden, right? That's where everything was, and we talked about that in the last episode. So moving forward, this is a picture I took of my garden last week. Actually, the whole thing's covered in snow right now, so it was kind of ideal in a sense that I didn't have a good picture of it in its current configuration. But it's all white now, so this is a bit better because I can actually see where everything is. We've had a bizarre winter this year with just not a lot of snow staying on the ground, even though it's been cold. I think it's minus 11 Celsius outside right now. Anyway, so this was what I was able to get done this week. And I mean, I'm going to keep mulling this over and looking at it right up until I start putting things in the ground. It's just part of my process. But for the most part, I'd say I'm like 95% done making my decisions about this garden. Again, I reserve the right to change my mind, right, as I'm sure most of you understand. So let me just talk about the process I go through in terms of how I decide what I'm going to plant for a given year. As I mentioned before, if you don't want to eat it, and if people in your family, if you have a family, if the people in your household don't like it, I wouldn't plant it, or I wouldn't plant a lot, right? So the main thing is, what does everybody like? What's everybody going to eat? I don't want to be going from door to door in my neighborhood trying to give stuff away. I'm sure many of you have been in that situation. People that don't keep gardens, they really don't appreciate things like that, right? Like, they won't come to your house and pick it. You have to go around, almost beg people to take stuff. People that are accustomed to buying stuff in grocery stores in cellophane wrappers, at least in my experience, I find they're kind of thrown off at being given actual fresh produce from a garden. It depends on the person, but I've always been amazed at that. And it's just a weird sort of thing. So you want to avoid that situation. It's your land, you're putting in the work, and the goal, at least my goal, is how much food can I get out of the land I've worked, right? I'd like it to look nice, and I want to enjoy myself when I'm there, and I want it to be relaxing and all that sort of stuff. But the ultimate goal is how much food can I get out of this land for as little work and with as little time and energy and money and resources put into it, right? That's the goal, and that's why I, over the years, have I've adopted a permaculture approach to gardening, a no-till approach to gardening. It's just so much easier, and you seem to get a lot out of it for very little work. So the first step for me is, not for any given year. I mean, I look back over the previous year and I sort of think about what I did and what I didn't, make a few notes and that sort of thing. But then what I do is I go to where I'm going to buy my seeds. I like buying my seeds online. I used to do it in a store, but I actually find I used to love going to like a garden center and just standing there staring at the wall of seeds. But I found over the years that I actually do prefer to buy online, because the great thing about buying online, if you go to an online store like Vessi Seeds, my sponsor, when you're looking at the different varieties of vegetable, right? And you let's say, oh, I want to try some beans this year, and or beets or whatever. Let's click on. You can see the different varieties. So they got avalanche beet and this kind of bull's blood beet, Chioggia beet, right? All these different kinds of beets, right? Cylindrical organic beets, colored beet collection, whatever. Detroit dark red. If I want to know more about that beet, I mean, sure, I can go like Merlin beet. For instance, Merlin beet's on sale. Let's have a look at that. Let's say oh, that looks nice and round and purple and beety, right? That looks nice. But let's say I want to know more about that, right? So I can just, great thing about being online, instead of just asking the person at the garden center who may know a lot about gardening or may know nothing at all. It's just a person who needs a job, right? And happen to talk themselves into the interview on that job, right? I can go and Google it, right? And find out. I can go to other sources, right? Oh, it's Merlin. Oh, it's an F1 hybrid. Okay, I know that, right? I mean, the first thing that comes up is the Vessi's one, but I can go on. I can go to Johnny's. I can go to West Coast Seeds. I can just keep looking, right? Maybe even I can find a an article on a particular variety that's been done by an agricultural extension of a university. So that's one of the real advantages. At this time of year, you've got nothing. You've got no real gardening to do. Everything's, at least in my part of the world, everything's frozen. You've got a lot of time on your hands, and boy, you put in the time thinking and planning about your garden, it'll definitely pay for itself later on in the season. A little bit of thought put into. I don't think I actually chose these beets, although they look really nice. What does it say? One of the sweetest and darkest red beets we have found in our trials. I think I chose a different kind of beet. But all I do is I go on the website, and I literally like, if you click on where it says vegetables, they're all listed alphabetically. And I just go down the list, and okay, I'm not going to grow artichokes because no one in the house will eat them. I've already got asparagus, don't need those. Oh, I need some beans. So then I went to the bean thing, and I didn't like some of the varieties of beans I tried last year. So I just looked at all the different varieties of beans and did a little bit, just like I showed you. I did searches on some of them. I tried Aldrin last year, really didn't like them. So what was the other one I tried? French Filet or some Maxi Bell or something like that. I wasn't a huge fan of those. But I tried these Ferrano Romano flat beans. These were awesome last year, so I'll definitely try those. I always want to try new things anyway. So all I do is I go down the list alphabetically and pick things that I want and add them to this list I have here. So I chose this provider bean is a variety of bean I used to grow in the past, and I got away from it because I was trying new things. But this was a great bean, and I was happy with it. So I think I'm going to go back to planting that. I chose these Ferrano Romano flat beans, and this called Serpador untreated Romano flat beans. They're like a yellow Romano. I really like those fat Romano beans. They taste really good. And these provider beans, they just grow. They're bush bean. All three of these are bush beans, and they grow really fast, and they provide a lot. I'll have my own seeds that I've saved. They're rattlesnake pole beans, which you can also buy. You can buy them just about anywhere, but you can get them at Vestie's. They're kind of neat because they have a nice looking. Well, they look like a snake-like appearance, right? I've actually thrown them at my wife to scare her, and there they are right there, right? So if you say, "Look, a snake," and you throw it to someone to catch, it'll work. If you can get a nice long one, maybe like close to a foot long. So anyway, they're a nice bean, and you can. I mean, the ones I have are an open pollinated. I don't know if they're an heirloom or not, but the ones I have are open pollinated. Yeah, they're heirloom. I mean, heirloom is open pollinated. It just means they're an older variety, but. Anyway, so I save the seeds from these every year, and luckily for me, they've not cross-pollinated with any of the other beans. I only grow one kind of pole bean, so generally speaking, when my pole beans are, and these are snap beans, you can just, you're not growing them from the seeds, you're growing them for the actual bean, the pod and all. When these are starting to flower, my bush beans are kind of done, so I haven't had any problem with them cross-pollinating with the bush beans thus far. Anyway, so I just work my way down the list like that, right? I choose everything, just going alphabetically down the list. Whoa, I want this. I basically choose all the things I want to do, and then once I've got that crazy list, right? And there's some things that I wanted, but I already had seeds. These are things I picked last year that I never planted, so I'm definitely not gonna buy those again. So I've got all these seeds, and then you go to your map and you try to find a place for everything. Where can I stick all that? And bearing in mind what you want to do for that year, right? Like I put down, I don't know if they're on this map here. No, they're probably here. All these notes, stop planting boards. I didn't bother doing that. Try leeks, more direct seeding of onions, 2 beds of carrots, 2 beds of beets. Last year, I didn't find that I grew enough carrots or beets. So I know that I've got to find, and I've got, my garden, I've got sort of 2 spaces. I've got the space that's inside the enclosure, inside the fence, and then like this is a south-facing slope here. It's a gradual hill. So like where the pea is in this pumpkin is about 5 feet higher than where I would be standing here, maybe even 6 feet higher by this height, right? So it's I don't know, I wouldn't say it's 45 degree, maybe 30-degree slope, south facing. So, but it's outside the fence. You can see these posts, right? There's a post. There's a post. There's a post right there, right? So that's, you can't really see the mesh, but there's a fence at the base of this slope to keep the deer and stuff out of my garden. So this year I decided to, there's on that slope where it says pumpkin, 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 there's a bit of a plateau. It goes down fairly steep and then it flattens out a bit. Then it goes down again to the base of the fence here. So I decided to make really small haphazard beds and plant pumpkins in them and just see how they're going to do. I know there's heat here, and there's actually places along this face where there seems to be, if you look, it looks like a, if you were pretending it was actually a huge space, it looks like a river. It's probably a drainage spot. So I thought maybe there's some way I could take advantage of that, almost like a natural irrigation. And I'll make a video on this, so I'm not going to explain it all here. But along that slope, I'm going to make these really haphazard, quick and dirty gardens, and I'm just going to use. Pretty sure I can get some aged horse manure somewhere, because pumpkins grow great right in aged horse manure. I mean, they love it. Pumpkins and squash. So I'm just going to basically make a kind of box. It's not really going to be that sophisticated. I'm just going to use some rotten logs and make a sort of like a wall to hold the soil in place, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet, and plant a couple pumpkins, right? And whichever one gets big, each of these spaces is going to be one plant eventually, right? And then it can just go all over this hill. It might be space for, might be able to put another one over here too. I don't know. I'll have to see, but that's a general idea that I'm going to plant pumpkins or squash, because I have found that because most squashes and pumpkins, the stems and the leaves have a kind of spiny texture that the herbivores seem to leave them alone. So I'm going to plant some there, right? So I got to make all these decisions of what's going inside the garden enclosure. That's basically, most of what I plant inside the garden enclosure is things that the animals are going to eat if they're outside. But not always, right? And also, this is, you're making all your decisions with crop rotation in mind. You don't want to be planting the same thing in the same place twice, because you're just asking for certain kinds of pests or diseases to proliferate if you're constantly putting the same thing that they attack in the same place. It just helps them set up shop and proliferate. You don't want that. So that's the general process. Everything has to find a room, and you can see here where I've got, like, it says variety, then it's SKU is just so I can give that to Vessi Seeds, the quantity. But then I say plan, which means I first make this list, and then I put a Y next to the thing if I've actively looked at the map and chosen a place. Oh yeah, I can put that here, right? So when I look at this list, I say Sweet 16 apple 1, yes. So I think I got the idea for the sweet. I was watching a pruning video of sort of well-known gardening guru Paul Gauci, and he was referring to an apple he grows called the Sweet 16. And he just said it was the greatest apple ever, and if he says it's good, it probably is. I don't know if this is the exact same thing, but I thought, why not try? And it just so happens that what am I looking at here? It just so happens that I've got I had 4 apple trees here, and I ran over one with my lawnmower. That's why you shouldn't drive ride-on mowers through gardens. At the time, it seemed like a great idea. If you listen to my podcast, you'll understand the backstory behind that, the lawnmower apple tree incident. But anyway, I had 4, and now there's 3. And one of them, and 2 of the trees that are back here, you can see one right around here. It's kind of hard to see. There's one in the foreground here. 2 of them are those 5 trees, like they're the trees I bought them at a hardware store, and there's more than one variety of apple grafted onto the tree. And it's a great idea for a tree, but the problem with that is that it limits your options when you're pruning, right? Because you can't just take any branch off. I mean, if you've only got one branch that's Cortland apples, for instance, then you can't take that branch off. It's going to be Cortland's forever, right? So some of the varieties are like branches that are 2 feet off the ground. It's just, it really limits your options for pruning the tree. And you want to be able to prune the tree so it has an optimal shape for producing apples. When you've got one of those 5 trees, you just don't have the same options because certain branches just have to stay on the tree. So not only that, but I honestly think those kinds of trees just aren't as healthy because one of them just, I don't think it produced any. One of them produced apples last year, and the other one produced a couple, but it looked dirty. It looked not dirty. It looked sickly, right? It just did not look good all season, and I think that's year 4 for that tree. It's just never done well. So I think I'm done. I'm going to replace the whole thing. And I know I can graft this or that, but I actually think there's something wrong with the tree. I don't know if the roots are not well, or I really don't know. And I'm just going to replace it with. Why continue to watch that tree not perform? How many more seasons should I stand there and watch it not perform, hoping it'll get better? I think the tree's a lost cause, and I'm going to put something else in there. So that's where that thing's going, right? And everything else has to find a place. I tend to, most of the herbs, I just said yes, 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 but I haven't found a home for them. I just jam them in here or there. You don't need like a 4x10 bed of any particular herb, right? You just need enough. Right? You need enough to flavor your food. You need enough to dry or make pesto with to hold you over for the entire. I haven't bought herbs in a number of years now. I grow enough. I've been meaning to do videos on how I preserve my herbs, and I always seem to be in a rush that time of year, and I just don't seem to have time to make a video on how I deal with all of that, because I know a lot of people grow herbs and then they just don't use them. They'll grow ridiculous amounts of herbs and not use them. And what's the point of growing them if you're not going to use them? I mean, use them during the season, you have the fresh herbs. But I tend to get way more herbs growing in a given season than I could ever use. So I've developed ways to preserve them, right? I basically make pestos, and when I say pesto, it's not an ideal kind of pesto with nuts and cheese and all that sort of stuff. It's much more of a means of preserving herbs so I can flavor dishes without having to dry them. But that's a whole nother video in and of itself. I have a different concept of pesto. It's more like an herb preserve. I'm preserving my herbs using salt and a bit of oil and a bit of citrus, right? Vinegar, acid, right? But anyway, that's another topic for another time. I will do a video on that at some point in time. So everything on this list, the process is to find a home for it. So I've got 3 different kinds of beans. Do I have a home? 3 homes for beans on the plan. I'm going to put beans here. This says bush beans. That'll be one kind of bean. This is strawberries, and I'm going to try to plant beans really late. Right? I got strawberries growing here, and I don't know. I just moved them last fall, so I don't think they're going to amount to much this year. I mean, we'll see. But I really don't plant my beans till like the 1st of June anyway. That's when it's warm enough to plant them, and even then it's risky sometimes. So the strawberries, they're June bearers, so I mean maybe I'll plant these bush beans after the strawberries have done their first. These are what are they called? Day neutral beans, so they produce all summer long, but your main crop is in June and in October, and you actually usually get a bigger one in October. And for this particular one, because the plants were so young and I just moved them in the fall, and I don't even know if they're going to make it through the winter because I moved them so late in the year. It's really a crapshoot. I thought maybe I'd plant some beans in that bed really sparsely, and the bean, because they're bush beans, they'll grow and they'll be gone. Sometime between the end of June and the 1st of September, they'll have grown and produced and be removed. So we'll see. There's something I'm thinking about trying. It's like an experiment, right? You'll notice a lot of my strawberries, I'm putting stuff in with them. Right here, I'm going to put onions in with the strawberries. And here, I've got an idea of a kale. This garden here is 7 feet by 7 feet, and it's really hard to get at the middle of the garden. So what I thought I would do was plant kale all around the outer edge, because you're constantly, I use cut and come again harvesting with my kale. So the kale will go all around the edge against these rocks, which the kale will love anyway, because the rocks gather heat in the summer. And then the whole center of this garden will be onions, because you don't really pick them. You just leave them, right? Just put onions down with a decent mulch and just let them grow all summer long, and I don't have to do anything with them. You pick them in late August, early September, when it's time to harvest all your onions. So I can leave the center alone, and that sort of solves the problem of trying to get into the middle there. I just won't bother with it. I'll put something in the middle that I was thinking of putting beets there, because a similar sort of thing. I just kind of leave my beets, a good number of them. I don't do anything with them until I might take the odd green or whatever, but I'm really not at them all the time, not accessing them all the time. So that was the idea. So I got a lot of these combination guys. I decided to plant some kind of broccoli here, but I've had a heck of a hard time growing broccoli in my garden, so I went with this variety here called Artwork Broccolini, which for those of you that don't know about broccoli, broccolini are usually like a smaller, where it is right there, Artwork Broccolini. It's just like a smaller, faster growing broccoli. I haven't had the best of luck. I mean, I've got lots of moisture in it. You think they'd do well where I am, but I've just not had a lot of luck. So I thought this fast growing broccoli might be the best bet for my garden. I mean, if you're not having success with something, either give up or try a different way. Right? Don't keep doing the same thing. So I tried the big broccoli. That didn't work. So I'm going to try these sort of smaller, faster growing ones and see how that works. I may even be able to do like more than one crop because they mature so quickly. Perhaps I could plant some in early August when some of my beds start to clear out, and maybe I'll be able to get some in the fall as well. We'll see, right? But my kids love broccoli. I mean, they really, really like broccoli. Which is, I consider a major accomplishment. And we don't even smother it with cheese and stuff like that. My wife and I are both completely lactose intolerant. But yeah, the kids, we basically just cook it like I do a lot of green things with garlic and salt. Garlic and salt and a bit of crushed chili peppers, basically. So yeah, we'll see how that works, right? So that's a solution to that. But that's the general idea, right? So you just work through here, and you'll notice everything has sort of moved over one. So the previous year's garden, I had parsnips were here, and now I can't go any further this way, so I'm putting parsnips, I think, down here, right? That's the new plan. See the parsnips? Oh, no, they're up here. Sorry. I moved that around. So just keep moving them over, one over. And I thought I would put spinach here and then eggplant, right? I'd plant spinach, and then very early, like probably late February, I will sow spinach down the center of this bed, down the center. And then, because the outer edges tend to be too cold for germination in these domes, seems to be the middle is the part that, a video I did a couple weeks ago where I was looking at what's frozen and what's not. Under these domes, the center of the garden is still thawed, but the outside edges are still frozen. So there's basically there's a 2 feet, these are 4 feet wide, so there's a 2-foot area down the center of these domed gardens that's thawed. Everything else is frozen. So you sow, if you're going to sow really early, like February, you sow down the middle. So the idea is I might change my mind on this, but sow spinach and then follow that with eggplant. The catch would be I'd have to put the dome back on to direct seed eggplant. For those that don't know, I don't do anything inside. My entire garden, I sow everything outside. If it's a heat-loving thing, I sow it under plastic outside, and if it's a cold-loving thing, I either just sow it naturally or I might put a dome over it temporarily to speed things up. This might not work. I don't know. I'm still thinking about this anyway. The idea is you plant spinach, and then as the spinach goes to bolt, usually sometime in July, then you put something else there. But that still might not work. I think spinach followed by kale is a better plan, actually, because you can move the kale from somewhere else. So I think maybe I'll do that. Yeah, because you're still mulling these things over, right? It made sense 2 nights ago when I was doing this end having a beer at the same time. But maybe so now I got to find some other place to put my eggplant. I'm not really quite sure. To direct seed eggplant, you got to have heat. So I'll have to make up my mind about that. Maybe one of these beds. These beds here are all these ones here along the end are all 4x8. So I can definitely get a dome over one of those. So maybe one of those would become an eggplant. I got to think about it. Anyway, you can see it's an iterative process, and it goes on and on. I have a garden that goes all along the base of the hill here. It's about 2.5 feet from front to back, and I don't know how long this is, maybe 10, 20, 30 feet maybe in total, maybe even longer. So what I'm thinking, remember it's south is this way over here, is that I'll put the corn at the back near the fence, maybe 2 rows of it. It's not good to have a single row of corn. Corn should have other corn near it for pollination. And then in front of the corn I'll put bush beans, so they won't rob the corn of light. And who knows, maybe I'll put some pole beans at the base of the corn. They can climb the corn and that sort of stuff, like a Three Sisters type deal. We'll just have to see how things evolve. This garden down here was potatoes last year. There's been many, I think this garden, with the exception of last year, every year previous to that I'd planted peas in this garden. So I'm giving it a break because it's just hard to resist planting peas and beans along a fence, because the fence is such a natural trellis, right? You don't have to do any work. But I'm trying to give this garden a break from that. Same with this. You see I have beans and corn. For a number of years I had beans at the back against the fence. They climb the fence. But they're actually kind of hard to pick, because you're almost 3 feet from the fence when you're standing on the ground over here. It's kind of an awkward space, but it's a natural place to grow beans. Anyway, I'm trying to give that back area a break from that sort of thing. So I thought down here I'd plant some carrots and see how that works out. I see I got a lot of strawberries here, and I'm planting herbs in with the strawberries. I'm going to put parsley in with these ones. This strawberry garden, it's at the base of a tree, but there's also about 5 blueberry bushes in there as well. So I think that's really enough for that garden. I mean, sometimes it's nice to jam roots in between the rocks. When you've got rock-bordered gardens, weeds seem to love growing in between the rocks. So that's just the garden telling you to jam something you like in the crack, right? So I like herbs. They're kind of like weeds. So I tend to just find places. I might start my herbs somewhere in a particular garden, but I move them into little cracks and holes. I tend to have herbs all over the place in my garden, just wherever they seem to fit in. I don't give them their own place. They have to they're the gypsies of the garden, right? They have to just find a place to be. I don't give them their own place to live, their own land. So that's the general process. You work your way through. Now there's some things, like I haven't bought any of this. I haven't ordered this stuff yet. I think this is a really good part of the process, where you almost like, it's almost like you do your shopping and then you go through the stress of trying to figure out where everything is supposed to go before you actually buy. So you get the pleasure of just saying, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this, but then you actually have to deal with the reality of saying, okay, where's all that stuff go, right? So as of right now, I haven't really found a home for this Cossack kohlrabi. It's a version of kohlrabi with a huge root, which I don't really care for, but it has huge leaves, which I really do like. I love the leaves on kohlrabi. I prefer kohlrabi leaves to collard leaves, because they taste very similar to collard leaves, but they cook way faster, and they grow fast too. I don't know, there's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. These are seeds I got. I have not, see there's no Y beside this. I've not found a place to put these. I still got to work that out. Even if maybe I won't work it out, but I've got to try to find a place to put those. But I definitely, the point of making this list and trying to find a home for everything is that you have to remove things that you can't find a home from. So I probably took 3 or 4, I can't remember what they are now, but I took 3 or 4 things off this list because I just couldn't foresee of a place where it could possibly go. So that's the general approach I've taken here. The space outside the garden, I've got these are already planted. Garlic here. Garlic, for those that don't know, you want to get good results, plant garlic in fall. Hardneck garlic, anyway. If you live in the north, I can't speak to other kinds of garlic or places that don't have a winter. But if you live in a place with a winter, my advice is to buy your hardneck garlic in like October and get it in the ground, and you'll have lots of garlic the next year. I had tomatoes in this garden last year, so I've moved them down here. There's a dome, so this is probably not, I haven't checked this one, but I assume it's not completely frozen. This bed is a hugelkultur bed. I think the bottom 3 beds are hugelkultur beds. The top 2 are just manure over ground beds. That's how I built them. I just made a box of trees and dumped manure there and started growing stuff in it, which works pretty darn good. I have to say, it's a lot easier than making a hugelkultur bed. I do think the hugelkultur bed has more longevity and there's a lot of advantages to doing that. But certainly just making a square and putting manure in, horse manure, is easy. It's fast, that's for darn sure. Anyway, the idea is to direct seed down here is to direct seed the tomatoes under the dome, and also put some basil in there, and then sometime in probably 1st of July take the dome off. I'm going to build a bunch of, I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do down here. If I'm going to build boxes or I'm just going to do really rough and ready simple gardens that are just like mounds. I haven't really made that decision yet. It'll be a matter of how much time I have to work with and how lazy I'm feeling, and what I think is necessary to grow something. But the idea is to have some, this ground here has all been broken to some extent, and this ground here down here isn't. So I find potatoes are an ideal thing to plant when you're trying to break new ground. You don't really have to do much to the soil to get the potatoes to grow, and you put a huge heavy mulch over the potatoes so you don't have to deal with them. You don't have to water them or hoe them or anything like that. And the result of that heavy mulch is that the only thing that really grows there is what can find its way through the mulch, which is potatoes. So by the end of the season, you've got lots of potatoes, and all of the whatever was growing there, for the most part, at least in my experience, is dead. So it works really well. And it's nice, just a quick, dirty, easy way to get a space cultivated by just letting the mulch and the potatoes do the work. So yeah, I haven't quite made all my decisions down there, but there's a certain amount of potatoes I need to grow. That's another point I wanted to make. If you look over my garden plan, you'll see that I don't grow a lot of exotic things. I grow things that people used to grow like in the old days, old timers, right? And there's a reason they grew a lot of these things. It's because aside from them just being good things to eat and they taste good and that sort of stuff, many of them are things that are easy to store or easy to preserve, or they're giving you a lot to eat for the space they take, like beans, right? For a 4x8 space, you get weeks and weeks and weeks worth of all the beans you can eat. You're getting a lot out of that. Like, if you went back 50 years ago, there wasn't anybody growing microgreens. I mean, why would you grow? You're getting almost nothing out of that, right? The point is, how much food can I get out of that land? Healthy, good food, right? So I tend to plant things that give a lot back, because that's what I'm looking for. I love being out in my garden. I love, there's certain things I grow that are kind of, pointless, I suppose, but most of the things I'm growing are because I want food. And you'll notice that a lot of things I grow are things, I'd say there's 2 categories. There's eaters and keepers. So some of the things you're growing are things that you're going to eat them as they come out of the garden, right? So the kale and the lettuce and tomatoes. I don't tend to store too many tomatoes. I just eat them fresh, basically. I know lots of people can them and do all kinds of stuff like that. I find it's a lot of work to put down tomatoes. I don't like having to boil things and spend hours doing that. It'd be different if I had a huge family to help out with that sort of thing, but it's mostly me doing most of that stuff. So I enjoy the fresh tomatoes when I have them, and then I just buy canned tomatoes and tomato paste and things like that during the year. I just find that works for me, but you do whatever is good for you. But a lot of the things I grow are things I can just put in a box and stick in my garage and eat them later on, right? I would say 2/3, roughly speaking, of what I grow, maybe even 3/4, certainly by weight, it would be at least 3/4, are things that are very easy to store. carrots, parsnips, onions, potatoes, right? Squash, right? It's winter squash anyway. You notice how one label will say W squash. That means winter squash, right? A squash that, you store it, you put it in a cold room, and you can eat it in February. I've got about 8 squash in my garage right now that, we basically eat a squash every weekend now. See how this says S squash? That means summer squash. This is not a squash you store, although I turn a lot of this into a relish because my wife is really a huge fan of zucchini. I mean, summer squash means, for the most part, zucchini. So zucchini, when I say summer squash, this is zucchini. My wife loves zucchini relish, and during the summer we also like to just cook zucchini. You might brush a little oil, salt, and pepper and do it on the barbecue or whatever. So those are things you're eating in season. Spinach is something you don't store that. You just eat it as it comes off. Kale, I store some, but I eat it too. So there's certain things in the garden that they're feeding you during the summer, but a good portion of what I'm growing in my garden is stuff I'm going to eat later after gardening season's over, right? There are things I'm going to keep as opposed to eat. I eat them later. So I find it's a lot easier to do it that way because a lot of the things that fall into that category, you really don't have to do much with them. You plant carrots. I mean, you do a bit of watering in April, and then once they've grown to a certain height, you put a mulch down, and then you seed them, and then you really don't do anything for 3 weeks to a month, and then you put a mulch down. You don't do anything for a couple more. The mulch, maybe that takes half an hour, and then a couple of weeks later, maybe you thin them out a bit. You thin them out over the course of the season. Whenever you want to eat carrots, you start thinning them then, right? So you really, after you've got your mulch down, you're really not working the carrot garden. You're harvesting. You're harvesting with the purpose to thin them, right? But there isn't a lot to do with those. Same with your beets. You take greens every once in a while, but once you've got your mulch down, there's really not a lot to do. It's just you give a source of beets and beet greens right up until sometime in like September when you harvest them all, right? So a lot of those gardens with those kinds of plants, they're even though it looks like there's a lot going on in the garden here, there's not a lot of work to do. The pumpkins, I mean, once you've got those to a certain height, you put a good mulch around them, and I don't water these. I don't do anything with my pumpkins. None of them. Last year I didn't water any of them. The rain takes care of it. You got a good mulch on there. You don't have to do anything. So even though I got a lot of stuff here, right? This is an unbelievably long list. It's not. It does seem a bit overwhelming to look at that list, but I've done this enough times to know that the actual logistics of that. They don't put the garden all in one go, right? Certain things go in at certain times, right? Some things go in April, some things I even start before then under the domes. Some things go in May, some things go in June. And even in July, I move a lot of things around. I've done videos on that before. And I gave myself a note too. I've still got 3 beds over here, right? Over here, I've got what used to be my compost bins. Is it 3 or 4? Anyway, there's like these, I don't know what you call them, 4x4. I guess they're like hugelkultur beds now. So I can grow anything that the deer aren't going to eat. I can plant there. So things like squash, potatoes, tomatoes, maybe onions, things like that I can plant over there. So I've still got some room for anything from this list that I want to plant more of, or I'm not happy with the space I've found for them. Maybe I don't have a lot of space to grow a lot of them, so I can put them over there. So I've still got some room over there. And there's lots of things growing in this garden that I haven't listed. There's the blueberries all the way down along here. There's raspberries. There's behind where it says squash here, against the fence, there's sunchokes, Jerusalem artichoke. I thought I'd just put squash in front of them and sort of train. I thought I'd plant squash along the edge. There's a garden here that's about 2 feet from front to back, all along this fence perimeter. And what I thought I'd do is plant squash and just train the squash bands, whatever kind of squash, winter squash, or probably winter squash because it has a vining habit. I thought I'd train the vine all along the base of the strawberry plants to suppress weeds and just take advantage of that space. It's really not an ideal space for growing anything anyway. So I thought maybe something like a squash would work there. It's just an experiment I'm going to try. Anyway, that's my general process. I hope I've touched on everything I wanted to touch on in this video. Have your shopping experience. Go on a shopping spree by just making a list of all the things you think you want, and then try to find a place for all those things. If you can't find a place for it, maybe take it off your list, or maybe think about expanding your garden. But using an approach like this allows you to think that all through, right, and really make the best decisions. Not buy. There's nothing worse than at the end of the year having things you didn't plan. I was looking at my seed pack a number of days ago, and there was 4 packs of seeds that never found their way into the ground. So that's a real shame, right? That's just bad planning on my part. So the purpose of going through an exercise like this is to not buy things you don't need. Think through what you're going to plant, almost like do the thought experiment. Do the thought experiment of your garden before you're in the thick of the season and you're rushing to get things done in amongst all your other obligations and commitments in life. So I hope you found that interesting, and if you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my free podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden, and have fun designing your garden for next year. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.